They mocked the cleaning lady in court, but what she said would change everything. No one in that room could imagine that, in just a few minutes, laughter would be replaced by silence. She didn't know why she had been called there. She was just cleaning the courthouse halls, as she had for 15 years. Every day, at 7 sharp, the old oak door creaked open, and there she was, with her bucket, her broom, and a faded badge barely showing her name, Martha. But that morning felt different. The courtroom was full, and the murmur of voices hung heavy in the air. Martha wiped the polished floor and heard muffled laughter echoing from the main corridor. The voices were familiar: lawyers, journalists, clerks. They were laughing at someone. Laughing at her. "Look, the philosopher with the mop," one of them said, loud enough for it to carry. She lowered her eyes and kept cleaning, just like always. But something trembled inside her. It wasn't anger, it was memory. The sound of their laughter dragged her back to a day she tried to forget, the same courtroom, the same echo of mockery, the same look of disdain. Only back then, she wasn't wearing a blue uniform. She was wearing black. The clock struck 9:20. The hearing would begin in minutes. Martha packed her things, ready to leave, when a voice came over the loudspeaker. "Mrs. Martha Collins, please remain in the courtroom. Your testimony will be required." Heads turned. A sharp silence swept through the room. She tried to explain that there must be a mistake. She was just a cleaner, but no one replied. The judge, a stern man with gray hair, simply watched her. "Mrs. Collins, please approach the stand." She walked slowly, her heart beating to the rhythm of her shoes on marble. 1, 2, 3 steps. The defense attorney, young, smug, gave a crooked smile. "Let's see what the cleaning expert can teach us today." Soft laughter rippled through the room. Martha took a deep breath. Her palms were sweating. The same old fear, the fear of not belonging anywhere. "Mrs. Collins," said the judge, "how long have you worked in this courthouse?" 15 years, Your Honor." "And do you know the defendant?" She hesitated. Her eyes rested on the man sitting at the defendant's table. "I know him, by sight," she said. "Years ago, he was a prosecutor. When his life and career fell apart, he came back here, not to the stand, but to the defendant's chair. But the truth ran deeper. She knew him better than anyone there. She knew the way his eyes dropped when he lied, how his fingers tapped his leg when he was nervous, how he pretended to stay calm when he was breaking inside. She knew because, 10 years earlier, that man had been the prosecutor who helped her bury her son, and the same one who vanished from her life without a word. The lawyer smirked again, unaware of the storm behind her eyes. "Very well, Mrs. Collins. Tell us what you saw that night." She looked at the judge, then at the crumpled envelope she carried in her apron pocket. She didn't know if she should speak. The contents of that envelope could change everything, not just the trial. The audience leaned forward. Even the judge, moments ago detached, now showed curiosity. "With all due respect, Your Honor," she began, "I'm not a lawyer or an expert. I can only tell you what I saw, and what I felt." Her words were simple, but they carried weight. The kind of weight that comes from someone who's lived more pain than anyone should. "That night," she continued, "I didn't just see what people say happened. I heard an argument. I heard promises breaking. I heard fear. And I heard regret. The defense attorney scoffed. With all due respect, Your Honor, this is irrelevant. She's just a cleaning lady. There's no way she could know what was going on. The judge frowned and tapped his gavel lightly. Let the record show the disrespect directed at the witness. This court does not tolerate contempt toward those who bring truth. Martha looked at him, surprised, grateful, but kept her tone steady. With all respect, sir, those who clean up after others see what's left behind. Sometimes, what looks like dirt is just the trace of someone who never got to defend themselves. A murmur filled the room. The judge said nothing, only gestured for her to continue. She pulled the envelope from her pocket. It was yellowed and folded many times, its edges torn as if it had been opened and closed over and over. This envelope was left in my cleaning cart 2 months ago. No sender, just my name. I didn't know what to do with it, so I kept it. But now I think, maybe it was meant for this moment. The lawyer grew restless. Your Honor, this is a circus. This woman is bringing us fairy tales. The judge raised his hand calmly. For the record, the letter will be accepted as contextual evidence. Both parties may address its contents later. Martha took a deep breath and began to unfold it. Inside was a handwritten letter, on hospital stationery. The paper trembled in her hands. Before she died, a woman asked me to deliver this, if this case ever came back to court. The room fell silent. The judge removed his glasses. The defendant lifted his head for the first time. She was my friend, Martha continued softly. And she told me, if I can't speak for myself, you speak for me. I promised I wouldn't let anyone be forgotten. For a moment, no one breathed. The sound of rain outside blended with her pounding heart. The judge motioned for her to go on. I don't know what you call justice, Your Honor, Martha said, but I know what it means to watch someone pay for something they didn't do. And I know what it feels like to be treated as invisible. Today, I didn't come here to clean the floor. I came to clean the truth. Whispers filled the room, not of mockery, but emotion. The lawyer tried to interrupt, but the judge raised his hand again. Continue, Mrs. Collins. She looked at the defendant. The man was frozen, eyes glistening. What happened that night wasn't one man's fault, she said. It was the mistake of many, mine included. Because I saw signs, and stayed silent. I heard cries, and told myself it was the wind. I thought it wasn't my place. But today, I know this is my place. Her voice trembled, but never broke. The judge leaned forward, his gaze heavy with respect and remorse. Mrs. Collins, do you realize the weight of what you're saying? I do, Your Honor. That's why I'm saying it. The lawyer stepped back. The once noisy courtroom now felt like a cathedral. And Martha, the invisible woman in a blue apron, stood at the center of it all. In that moment, no one laughed. No one mocked. The cleaning lady spoke, and the court listened. The courtroom's silence felt alive. Every breath was audible. The judge watched the woman before him with the quiet focus few noticed. Martha took a deep breath. The microphone crackled. And then, in a timid, almost fragile tone, she began to speak. She said she didn't understand much about laws or complicated words. But but she understood routine. Time. The kind of details people missed because they were always in a hurry. She said that for 15 years she had swept the same corridors at the same hour, and that this courthouse was like a book she read every day, even if no one knew it. A few chuckles slipped from the audience. The defense attorney, dressed in gray, crossed his arms with a smirk. But the judge stayed still, serious, composed, as if he already expected something more. Martha raised a small blue notebook, worn and stained with cleaning solution. She said she wrote everything in it: when a door was left open, when a light stayed on, when she heard crying, hurried footsteps, voices arguing. It was her way of keeping control over what she could. The courthouse was her home, and that notebook, its memory. As she flipped through it, the sound of the pages echoed across the chamber like the ticking of a clock. Every page felt like a fragment of time. She spoke about the night when it all began. Said she had stayed late because someone had turned the records hallway into an improvised coffee spot. She remembered a woman's nervous laughter, the clatter of a pen hitting the floor, and a phrase whispered in fear, *, no one can ever know about this. *. The defense attorney laughed. Called it irrelevant, coincidence. But the judge told her to continue. And she did. She explained how she always noted times, out of habit. That she even logged when the elevator moved, out of instinct. And that something about that night didn't make sense. The elevator had stopped twice after hours, and the next morning, when she went to clean, she saw wet footprints leading toward the room where the incident had begun. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. No one expected such precision from an invisible woman. But her tone wasn't accusatory. It was calm, steady, the voice of someone simply telling the truth of what she'd seen. The judge leaned forward, asked how she could be so sure of the date and time. Martha opened the notebook, pointed to a line, and said, "It was the day the rain started earlier than the forecast. I keep track when it rains. The east corridor floor gets slippery." A heavy silence fell, as if each word she spoke was dismantling something that everyone thought unshakable. The defense lawyer tried again, mocking her. Said it was just the obsession of a lonely cleaning lady. Martha looked at him for a moment and said, "Maybe it is. But that same obsession once saved a child, when I noticed smoke before anyone else did. I guess paying attention to small things is never a waste of time." The audience stirred. A journalist stopped typing. The judge clasped his hands and took a slow breath. There was something in her voice, calm yet unyielding, that seemed to pierce through every defense in the room. She went on. Said that the man on trial wasn't just another name on a file. She saw him every day, walking by with his head down, carrying a weight no one else could see. And every time she saw him, she remembered something she'd heard long ago, from a woman who used to pass through the same corridor, eyes swollen, holding a small bag. That woman had once handed her an envelope and said, *, if I can't speak one day, speak for me. The audience held its breath. Martha said she had kept the envelope hidden for years, out of fear, and had never understood the reason behind that request. But that day, when she saw the defendant's name, she knew the moment had come. The defense attorney tried to cut her off, but the judge raised his hand. Let her finish. Martha explained that the woman who gave her the envelope was the defendant's mother. She worked nearby, at a coffee shop, and disappeared months later, after being seen crying on the courthouse steps. And from that day on, something in Martha never rested. Every morning, when she wiped that step clean, she thought of the woman's face and wondered what had happened to her. Now, in front of everyone, the story finally made sense. The envelope, the name, the judge's gaze. The pieces were falling into place. Martha took a breath and said softly, "I don't know what's in this letter. I never opened it. I didn't think it was my right. But she asked me to keep it safe. So I did." The judge leaned forward, his eyes a mix of respect and curiosity. He told her she could hand it over if she wished. She hesitated. Her hands trembled. The paper was yellowed but intact. Every fold looked like a secret. Before handing it over, she turned to the attorney who had laughed at her earlier and said, "You know, sir, sometimes the truth is just waiting for someone to sweep away the dust." The room went silent. Even the air conditioner seemed to stop. She took 2 small steps forward, placed the envelope on the judge's bench, and returned to her seat. No drama. Only dignity. The judge picked up the envelope gently, as if holding something alive. The session was suspended for a few minutes. When he returned, his expression had changed, softer, yet heavier. Martha never learned what the letter said. But from the look in the judge's eyes, she understood nothing would ever be the same again. And for the first time in 15 years, she sat down. Because she knew that her voice, simple, trembling, but true, had finally been heard. The courtroom was still silent when the judge opened the envelope. The soft crackle of paper unfolding echoed through the chamber. No one dared to breathe. Martha watched from a distance, hands clasped, body tense, eyes fixed. She seemed elsewhere, as if the weight of all those years had returned at once. The judge read quietly for a few seconds, but his face said enough to ignite everyone's curiosity, a flicker of surprise, a shadow of pain, and something that looked very much like regret. No one knew what was written, but the air grew heavy. With every line, the judge's expression changed. The lawyer who had mocked the cleaning lady now fidgeted in his seat, uneasy, as if trying to predict what would come next. After what felt like an eternity, the judge placed the letter on the desk, took a deep breath, and spoke, his voice low but resolute. "This court needs to hear this." He began to read aloud. The first words were simple, but filled with soul. "If someone is reading this letter, it means that truth has finally found its time." A murmur swept the room, and Martha closed her eyes. She recognized that handwriting, though she didn't quite know why. "My name is Helen Moore. I worked in this city for 20 years. I was the mother of a son who may be standing trial today. If he is here, do not judge him only for what he did, but for what he had to endure." The defense attorney straightened in his chair, his breathing quickening. There are things human justice cannot see, but time does. "I watched my son crumble, not because of crime, but because of despair. He made mistakes, yes, but he did not make them alone. And if one day I can no longer speak, I ask that someone who has seen more than paperwork tell what they saw with their own eyes." The judge's voice faltered. He cleared his throat and continued. "I worked nearby, and many times, when exhaustion overtook me, I would confide in a simple woman, one with an apron and a quiet smile. She never judged, never interrupted, just listened. One day, when I realized my life was falling apart, I trusted her with my greatest fear, that my son would be condemned for something he didn't do alone. I asked her to keep this letter, in case I ever disappeared. The word disappeared made the crowd stir in shock. The judge paused. Martha lowered her gaze. Her tears were not of guilt or shame, but of something deeper, the certainty that all of it had meaning. He went on reading. If this letter ever comes to light, let it serve as a reminder that the silence of the humble is also a form of testimony. The corridors see what the courts ignore. The walls hear what the judges do not. And sometimes, the truth lives in the footsteps of those who sweep the floor. No one dared to breathe. This was no longer a defense, it was a revelation. The judge placed the letter down, drew a deep breath, and looked toward Martha. "Do you confirm," he asked, "that this was the woman who gave you the envelope?" She nodded slowly. Said she remembered the face, the calm voice, the sadness in her eyes. Said she never understood why that woman had trusted her so deeply, only that, ever since that day, she'd carried the weight of that promise as something sacred. The judge closed his eyes briefly, as if to steady himself. When he spoke again, his voice had softened, slower, more human. "In all my years on this bench," he said, "I have never witnessed something like this. A truth so pure it needs no grandeur, only courage." The lawyer, stripped of arrogance, stood and asked to see the letter. The judge allowed it. He read in silence for a few seconds, and when he returned the paper, his face had changed. There was nothing left to argue, not against something so utterly honest. Martha stood quietly, hands still joined, unaware of the magnitude of her own presence. The judge looked at her. "Mrs. Collins, do you have anything you wish to add before I enter this document into the record?" She took a breath. Said she didn't know much about law, but she knew about promises. Said that woman had asked her to keep something too heavy for words, and that now, finally, the court wasn't just judging a man, it was listening to a mother. The audience began to applaud, but the judge raised a hand. "This is not a spectacle," he said. "It's a reminder of what justice was meant to be." The words hung in the air like an invisible bell. The prosecutor, an older man, cleared his throat and asked to speak. He said that, in light of this new evidence, certain aspects of the case would need to be reviewed. He didn't speak out of courtesy, but because, for the first time, his conscience demanded it. The judge agreed. Announced the session would be adjourned for reassessment. Martha stood still, unsure whether to leave or wait. Then the judge looked directly at her and said, "Mrs. Collins, this court thanks you for your courage." She corrected him gently. More was her name, Your Honor. "Mine is Martha Collins. I only kept a promise." A murmur of respect swept through the room. The judge gave a faint smile. "Even so," he said, "you reminded us all what it means to fulfill one's duty with heart." As people began to rise, reporters moved toward her. Martha lowered her head and stepped away quietly, holding her cleaning bucket like an anchor. But something in the judge's eyes suggested the story wasn't over. She had barely reached the hallway when she heard her name echo again. Startled, she turned. It was the judge, calling her back. He said he needed to speak with her privately. In a small chamber, he received her standing. His gaze, once stern, was now only human. He asked why she had never spoken about the letter before. Martha's answer was simple. Because no one would have listened. and I wasn't sure I had the right, until today." The judge stayed silent for a long moment. Then he stepped closer and said words she would never forget. "Justice begins when someone dares to speak, even when they believe no one will listen." She nodded, eyes glistening. The judge extended his hand, not as authority, but as one human being to another. When she left that room, the hallway seemed different. The same floor, the same lights, but something had changed. People looked at her with quiet respect. Some of the guards bowed their heads as she passed. Martha didn't fully understand what she had done, only that something within her had been set free. As she walked toward the cleaning closet, she heard someone, a lawyer, maybe, whisper, "She changed the verdict." But she didn't stop. She knew what had changed was far greater than that. Time itself seemed to slow. Each step echoed like the courthouse was breathing with her. At the door, she paused for a moment, adjusted the scarf around her neck, drew a long breath, and, for the first time in many years, smiled. It wasn't a smile of triumph. It was peace. Outside, sunlight poured through the tall courthouse windows, bathing the marble floor in gold. Martha looked toward the sky and whispered, "Helen, your voice was heard." And in that moment, though no one else noticed, the story stopped being about justice. It became a story about redemption, about a promise kept, and about the power of a single truth, spoken at the right time. The next morning, the courthouse felt different. People arrived in silence, as if even the building itself had learned to respect what had happened there. No one laughed. No one whispered in the halls. Even the sound of footsteps seemed lighter. Martha entered as always, bucket, cloth, the same faded badge, but something in her had changed. There was a new calm in her movements, a quiet strength born from having faced fear and survived. She didn't want to be remembered. She just wanted to do her job. But fate never forgets those who challenge it with silent courage. In the main hall, the lawyer who had once mocked her was waiting for the next hearing. When he saw her, he stood up. For a moment, he seemed ready to avoid her gaze, but he couldn't. He walked toward her and spoke, his voice no longer carrying the tone of an invincible man. "I owe you an apology." Martha, surprised, simply smiled. "You owe me nothing, sir. Time has already taken care of that." He insisted. "No. I laughed at you in front of everyone. And you were the one who brought the truth. I lost respect for myself that day." She replied gently, "Sometimes you have to lose something before you can see again. You saw it, didn't you?" He nodded. Words were unnecessary. Inside, the judge was reviewing the case files. The letter had been entered into the record, but what it had done went far beyond the paperwork. He couldn't stop thinking about how that woman, with no title, no rank, no power, had restored his sense of purpose. For the first time in years, his robe didn't feel like a barrier. It felt like a reminder to serve, not to rule. When the trial resumed, the courtroom was full. Reporters, staff, onlookers, everyone wanted to witness the outcome. The defendant, the man once branded guilty in everyone's eyes, looked different. The emptiness in his gaze had been replaced by something between relief and remorse. The judge called for order and began. He said that after reviewing the letter and new testimony, serious inconsistencies had surfaced. The prosecutor asked to speak and admitted that some of the charges no longer held up. But the most powerful moment was yet to come. The defendant asked to address the court. His voice trembled but didn't break. "Your Honor, I'm not innocent. But I'm not the monster they said I was. I made mistakes. I did, but I never meant to hurt anyone. And what my mother wrote, that's the truth I've been hiding." The judge watched him closely. The room was still. My mother always believed I could change. I lost that faith a long time ago. But when I saw that woman lift the envelope my mother had trusted her with all these years, something inside me broke. I realized my mother's faith hadn't died. She just gave it to someone the world would never see as a threat. That's love. And I failed it. Soft sobs spread through the audience. "I don't know what will happen to me after this," he continued, "but what that woman did gave me back something I thought was gone forever, the will to be better. I thank her. And I ask my mother's forgiveness, wherever she is." The judge drew a deep breath. It was impossible to keep his voice steady. "Justice isn't measured only in punishment," he said. "Sometimes, it shows itself when someone chooses to be human in the face of what's easier to ignore." The prosecutor, usually composed, lowered his head. The entire courtroom seemed to shift in temperature. Martha, sitting quietly at the back, tried to hold back her tears. She didn't want attention. But hearing that man reclaim his soul, that was enough. It was as if every hard day, every humiliation, every quiet night had finally found meaning. Then the judge made an unexpected announcement. He declared that the trial would be suspended for a complete reevaluation of the evidence. And before the court, he said, "This hearing will not only decide a verdict, it will remind us that dignity is not a privilege of position, but of character." Applause erupted. Martha bowed her head, embarrassed, but the judge raised his hand. "Stand," he said. "Not for me, for her." And everyone stood. The sound of chairs scraping across the floor echoed like a soft thunder, a gesture that mirrored the first story that started this entire universe, a courtroom rising, not out of obligation, but out of respect. Martha wept silently. She had never felt seen like that before. After the session, the judge called her again. Said he had something to propose. He told her he wanted to create a new program within the courthouse, a place where staff, janitors, guards, interns, anyone could speak, report, or simply be heard. He would call it the voice of the corridors. Because, he said, justice begins where silence ends. Martha listened quietly, then smiled. "That's going to change a lot." "It will," the judge replied. "And it started with you." In the days that followed, the story spread through the city. Headlines, radio shows, neighborhood papers, all talked about Asterisk, the cleaning lady who changed a verdict. Asterisk. But what struck people most wasn't the story itself, it was the tone. There was no irony, no spectacle. Only reverence. Some tried to interview her, but she refused every time. She said she didn't want to be the news. She just wanted to go back to cleaning the courthouse. Yet, whether she wanted it or not, her life had changed. The judge insisted she take a new position, a symbolic administrative role in the new program. She hesitated, unsure she was capable. He said, "You saw what all of us missed. That's what leadership looks like." In time, she settled into her new routine. She no longer carried a bucket, but every morning she still walked the halls, just to make sure everything was in order. It was her way of staying true to who she was. The lawyer, now a changed man, sought her out one last time. He told her he'd begun doing volunteer work, offering free legal aid to those who couldn't afford it. "You taught me something no law school ever could," he said. She smiled softly. "The world doesn't need more clever people," she said. "It needs more people who pay attention." One afternoon, as the sunlight streamed through the courthouse windows, Martha sat on a bench in the main hall, watching life move around her, young lawyers rushing by, guards, clerks, busy people with distracted eyes. But there was something different now. People looked at one another. A young woman in a blue cleaning uniform approached shyly. "Mrs. Martha, right? I heard your story. I work cleaning here too. And I just wanted to say thank you. You made me proud of my badge." Martha took her hand and said, "It's not the badge that defines who we are. It's what we do when no one's watching." The girl smiled through tears. Outside, the church bells nearby rang out the end of the afternoon. Martha looked up at the sky and thought of the woman who'd written the letter, of the promise fulfilled, and how life is made of echoes. What's spoken with love never dies, it just changes its voice. And in that moment, she finally understood what it all meant. It was never about trials or verdicts. It was about being the bridge between silence and truth. And so, the invisible woman who once swept the courthouse floors became the one who inspired everyone who walked its halls. Her name would not be forgotten, not because she demanded it, but because she earned it. And sometimes, that's all justice really needs. Someone willing to speak the truth, with a clean heart. Months had passed since the day Martha spoke before the court. The case had taken a new direction, and the story had crossed the city's walls. It was no longer just news, it had become a symbol. A reminder that truth, no matter how simple, always finds its way. The program The Voice of the Corridors was thriving. A small room, once forgotten at the back of the building, had been transformed into a place of listening. Simple chairs, warm coffee, and a plaque on the wall. Every silence deserves to be heard. Martha had written the phrase herself, in her small, steady handwriting. Since then, staff members, interns, even visitors, had begun coming there to share what they saw, what they felt, what they feared. They weren't always big cases. Sometimes, they were just confessions from people who felt invisible. But slowly, that room began to change the entire atmosphere of the courthouse. What was once cold and impersonal began to breathe empathy. Martha still arrived early every morning, as she always had. Even without her bucket or broom, she insisted on cleaning the floor of that room herself. She said that any place where people open their hearts deserved to be truly clean. One morning, as she wiped down the table, she heard footsteps behind her. It was the judge. He carried a brown envelope, the same kind that had started it all. "I thought I should give this to you personally," he said. Martha looked at him, curious. The judge explained that after reviewing the evidence, the defendant, Helen Moore's son, had been partially acquitted. Not because he was blameless, but because the court had finally recognized the human story behind his mistakes. He would serve a reduced sentence, and, afterward, be given a chance to start over. The envelope held a letter from him. Martha opened it carefully. The handwriting was steady but unsure, like someone relearning how to live. Mrs. Martha, it read. For a long time, I hated the world. I thought the only thing left for me was to pay for what I'd done. But you showed me that truth isn't only what's written in files. You were the voice my mother always knew existed. Today, because of you, I want to begin again. I promise to do the same for others. Thank you for speaking when no one else would. Martha's hands trembled as she finished reading. The judge stood silently, respectfully. He asked me to give you this, too, he said, holding out a small photograph. It was old, Helen Moore and her young son smiling in front of a modest house. On the back, written by hand. Truth can hide, but it can't be lost. Martha held the photo as if it were sacred. She knew, she whispered. She knew her love would one day be heard. In the months that followed, Martha began receiving invitations, schools, universities, ethics conferences, asking her to speak. But she always declined, gently. She said her story wasn't about fame, it was about conscience. Even so, her name spread. Some called her Asterisk, the voice of the humble. Asterisk. Others, Asterisk, the woman with the letter. Asterisk. But to her, she was still just Martha, the woman who once cleaned floors and never stopped believing that every clean floor was an act of faith. One afternoon, as the courthouse emptied out, Martha received an unexpected visit. A young janitor, nervous but kind-eyed, approached her. Mrs. Martha, can I talk to you for a minute? Of course, dear. The girl explained that she'd just started working there and was going through a hard time, a sick father, unpaid bills, the fear of losing her job. She said she'd heard the story of the cleaning lady who stood before a court, and it gave her strength to keep going. Martha took her hand and said softly, "My dear, sometimes God puts us on the floor, not because we're beneath others, but because we're the ones holding the roof up. And if you ever fall, remember, the floor can also be a place to start again." The girl cried and hugged her. In the corridor, a few employees stopped to watch. It was a simple moment, but powerful, like everything Martha did. As time went on, the courthouse became home to stories of second chances. A security guard who exposed a corruption scheme. A receptionist who helped prove a defendant's innocence. An intern who confessed to a mistake before it ruined a verdict. All inspired by the woman who once dared to speak. The city changed too. Social projects were created in honor of Helen Moore and Martha Collins. At the courthouse entrance, the city council placed a small plaque. Here, truth needed no power, only a voice. Years later, Martha walked more slowly, but the light in her eyes never faded. One day, the judge, now retired, came to visit her. He brought flowers in an envelope. Inside was a framed copy of Helen's original letter, with a note. To the woman who turned justice into humanity. They talked for hours, about the past, about how a single word can change the course of many lives. The judge told her that the voice of the corridors had spread to other courthouses across the country. It had become a national initiative. Martha smiled softly. Then it was worth keeping that envelope all those years. It was, he said. And even more worth it that you found the courage to open it. Outside, children played in the square, their laughter carried by the wind. The judge looked out the window. "You know, Mrs. Martha," he said, "sometimes I think justice is like those children. If we don't care for it, the world hardens, and innocence dies. She replied, but there's always someone who sweeps the ground so they can play again. They both laughed, and the silence that followed was filled with peace. When the judge left, Martha stayed, staring at the framed letter. She ran her fingers over the glass, as if caressing a living memory. The evening light streamed through the window, illuminating the words. That night, before going to bed, Martha opened her small notebook, the same one that once held cleaning notes. Now, she filled it with reflections. On the first page, she wrote, "Life doesn't change when someone is heard. It changes when someone truly listens." She closed the notebook, turned off the light, and slept in peace. Time moved on. Years later, when Martha was no longer among the living, the courthouse held a ceremony in her honor. The hall was full: judges, lawyers, clerks, journalists. At the center stood a simple portrait, Martha smiling, in her blue uniform, eyes serene. The retired judge gave the speech. He said her story was proof that no one is too small to change the world. That justice without compassion is just a building. And that ordinary people are the invisible foundation of everything. At the end, he asked for a minute of silence. And then, almost instinctively, everyone stood. The sound of chairs sliding across the floor echoed like soft thunder, just as it had years before. A gesture that began as a tribute had now become tradition. Outside, the wind moved through the flags. A leaf from the old oak tree drifted gently down the courthouse steps. The same oak where Martha once stood waiting for the door to open. And for a fleeting moment, some swore they heard the faint sound of a cloth gliding over marble. As if time itself was still sweeping the path she'd left behind. On the wall of the main hall, a bronze inscription read, "It's never too late to begin again. Martha Collins." And so, the courthouse that had once been a stage for arrogance became a sanctuary of humility. The letter that began as a secret became a legacy. And the woman who once swept the floors left the world cleaner than she found it.